So, the talk, it's about the Python framework. And I'm Raphaël Collet. I'm actually the team leader of the framework team, the server-side framework team. And I work for Odoo since 2011. We're still enjoying developing new stuff in there. So you can get to this page there if you scan it. That gives you access to the slides if you want to, and you can write down questions on it if you want to. Okay? So my agenda is pretty small. Essentially, I've collected, in fact, all the stuff we've done this year since Odoo 18, and tried to make a presentation out of it. And one of the large stuff we worked on are domains. So you remember Odoo domains? Essentially, they are a list containing tuples, which are conditions you put on fields, and some combinators like and, or, and not. Okay? Those are domains. They still are that. But we've added a new object to handle them. That's kind of an alternative representation for domains as a dedicated Python object, which actually implements an abstract syntax tree. It's an AST. Okay? And as you can see, you can build such an object. So you just import domain, and you can pass it a list with a traditional domain, and it essentially parses the list and builds up the corresponding AST. Or you can use it to build a condition, and you can even use it to. So the third case is if you pass it true or false, then you're building the corresponding AST true or false. Okay. And as you can see, we benefit from overriding the magic method in Python, so you can use the ampersand, the vertical bar, the or for the or, and the tilde for the negative. So it's easier to build programmatically domains like that. And we even added a few methods that essentially ease either the transformation of domains or the analysis of domains. So you can, for instance, iterate on all the conditions to figure out, do we use this field or not, or something like that. So that's an example where if there's a condition with the field foo, we replace that condition by false, for instance. So why did we introduce this new object? Well, essentially, for one thing, it's when you're building a domain programmatically or want to analyze it programmatically, it's way more comfortable and less bug prone than figuring out that it's a list. But if you have combinators and if you want to analyze there, like one of the or conditions, you have to figure out the prefix notation of domains and stuff. There you don't need to. It's way simpler. It also provides earlier stage validation. So as soon as you pass something to domain, it already does some validation for you. And the main motivation for that object is that it would serve as a base for generating SQL, the where clauses that we put in our SQL. And it's also serve as a basis for the method filter domain, which is now simply filtered. And using this as a base, we say, okay, if we want to make better SQL, the first thing is essentially try to get a better domain first. Maybe we can simplify the domain, apply some transformation that keep it equivalent, so logically equivalent, but actually in a form that gives somehow better SQL. I showed you examples of that. And the optimizations, we made a kind of a mini framework. They behave like a bit like plugins. So you declare an optimization to say whether it works on conditions, maybe the kind of fields you want to focus on, the kind of operators you want to focus on, and then you can implement a little optimization for that. The optimization is mostly generic. So I say it's the base for the SQL generation. And so this is the call step, somehow the call graph when you want to convert such a domain, or you pass a domain to underscore search, to the method search, and how search transforms that domain and generates SQL on top of it. So it first calls the optimization function, and then the toSQL function. And as you can see, the toSQL function essentially delegates each condition to the corresponding field, and then the field itself delegates to the model and then to itself for serializing the field part, the field expression to SQL, and then implements the field. The fact of delegating those things to the field, it enables that, for instance, all the tricky stuff about, I don't know, date and date time fields is part of the implementation of the date and date time fields. It's no longer into a big if statement with 50 different cases. It's now localized to the field that uses this feature, okay? So there's quite some stuff being done, for instance, in the date time fields. There's some special tricks in the relational fields. All the special case for the textual fields about the unaccent and all that stuff. This is all only the char text and the HTML fields implement that. So it has essentially better code localization and delegation. And on the other side, as you can see, we apply for optimizing the domain a bunch of generic optimization. So some that will change the conditions to simplify them for some of them, to rewrite them in a more, let's say, conventional standard way. We have merge optimizations. Merge optimizations, they work at the level of AND and OR nodes. And by the way, the AND and OR nodes, they're not just binary nodes. We made them n-ary. So when you have, for instance, an OR domain with many children, you don't end up with an AST that looks like a long chain of stuff. Instead, you have your OR node with all its children right beneath. So we automatically flatten, and it helps preventing like recursion errors in Python and things like that. And so for the merge optimization, what it does, it essentially look at the nodes of such an AND or OR node and group them, sort them in a certain way, and enables to essentially merge some of the conditions. I'll show you one example of that. And then the other stuff we also call is that part of this complete optimization is calling the search method of the fields, the computed fields that have a search method. We use that search method here. And the search method is always applied, even if the field is a stored field in the database. So the search method may be used like a kind of a pre-processing of a condition on that field. It may help, for instance, for cleaning up the right-hand side value. It's used for that. Okay? So by being a bit more systematic, the API is actually more convenient for doing domain transformations. One thing we've added, about the optimizations, just getting back here. So the examples I show you are typical optimizations we have. So either conditions that are trivially true or false. We also rewrite systematically, for instance, the equalities and inequalities into in and not in. And the advantage of the in conditions is that they may be grouped together. So if you have, for instance, f equal 1 or f equal 2, we transform that to f in the set 1, f in set 2, and when you have an or between, then we can make the union of the sets and so on and so on. So that's kind of basic math, but it enables essentially to simplify the domain. And that kind of stuff is actually also helpful for Postgres. Essentially, it's easier to parse, and it's kind of more straightforward, where you have to look up your index for and things like that. Okay. And the any operator essentially is when you make a condition on a relational field, and you're testing for a domain on the records, the core records of that field. And then again, we have optimizations to group the any nodes. So essentially, that this helps kind of grouping subqueries together, which is very important for the performance in Postgres. If we keep many small subqueries, that makes Postgres very inefficient, because it essentially discards some optimizations. And here we try to keep them as much as possible. One thing we've added, and that was pretty easy with this new domain structure, we've added actually a domain-specific language for dates, and essentially for relative dates. So I'll let you guess what the second one is for. So the first one is easy. Okay, you say the field moment should be after 5 minutes ago. Say 5 minutes ago. And the second one, so that's kind of the chemistry of the relative delta stuff. You can try to figure out that actually it essentially says that last week. Moment should be within last week. And with the DSL, we essentially do the same thing. We just made a little syntax for it, a little parser, and then it does the same thing as the relative delta, but that's kind of way more readable that way. So you could see now minus 5 minutes, or when you say equal Monday, you say, okay, put yourself to the Monday of this week, and then do minus 1 week, or just stay on Monday, and that's how the second domain is translated. This is very useful, and when you set up filters and things like that, way easier to maintain. We also provide other stuff. So we've introduced a special operator which behaves like the any operator. So the any operator is like the any function in Python. Essentially, so you say, if I have a relation like line IDs, any something, it means at least one line satisfies the right-hand side domain. That's what it means, basically. And here we have introduced a variant of that operator, and that variant solves another problem. If you're thinking about a related field, so something like the something field there, so it's related and it traverses a many-to-one field, for instance. And if it's computed sudo, it means that you can actually test anything on the value of that field. So you could put any condition on the value of that field, even if you don't have access to its model. So if you don't have access to the model of the field thing, you should still be able to apply a domain to test the value of the field thing next to some ID. And so to try to implement that, essentially we made an operator any. So the semantics of the any operator, if we say line IDs any domain, it means there exists a line in the line IDs of the current record that satisfies the domain and that's also accessible for reading. You have the access rules that are added to it. This version simply doesn't add the access rights condition. So it enables to bypass the access rights condition. Of course, this operator is only for internal use. You cannot use that via RPC, for instance, because that would be a way to leak data. Okay, so you cannot use it via RPC, but you can use it internally. And the result is that you can rewrite a condition on something like there into the one below. And this enables to test you a domain on the field thing without having to take into account access rights. And that's how you say you bypass the access rights just to get the value of the field thing. And it does not propagate to the right-hand side. So if operator, the variable operator, is itself a condition like any, the right-hand side of that operator will have the access rights applying to it. Okay, so it's not like doing a simply sudo thing. It only bypasses for getting access to that value. It does not propagate that thing. So we don't leak any information with that. It's safe, as long as any bang is used internally. So you've got the any bang and not any bang. And we use that for implementing the conditions on the related fields. And there's an extra thing, is that when you have a many-to-one with an any bang operator, we have a shortcut in the implementation. Instead of doing a subselect with the right-hand side and say, oh, the value of the field must be into this subselect, we transform simply this condition into a left join, which is generally better practice in terms of database, of SQL, I think. Better database SQL practice. Okay, so we had a lot of fun with those domains, and we'll keep on using domains for doing many other kinds of optimization. We've been up to a certain point right now, but we'll go beyond that. We'll keep on going on beyond that. Now I'll jump a bit into stuff we've changed in the ORM, for better or for worse, but hopefully for best. And of course, part of those improvements come, in fact, directly from the ability to improve, to get better domains and use the domain as a support for generating better SQL. And so we've improved the generate SQL, mostly for performance. And we tried essentially to generate SQL that uses essentially better practice in terms of SQL, and so that Postgres essentially applies better heuristics when trying to execute an SQL query. Because one of the thing we've noticed, for instance, is that when you have a subselect and a condition like that field not in, and then you have a subselect, Postgres is usually very bad at implementing that. It typically tries to materialize the subselect, which can be a huge thing, and then figuring out the stuff that's not in, and that's not efficient. So we try instead of using in and not in with a subselect, we've transformed most of those conditions into exist and not exists. Logically speaking, they're equivalent. So what we've made is strictly equivalent, but Postgres has actually better heuristics for the not exists, for instance. For the exists, it's pretty much similar, but for the not exists, it usually tries to solve the rest of the conditions and then checks whether something exists And if it does it, then the condition is false or otherwise. So the way essentially it improves the query plan of the query. So we got better results with that, and we can use stuff like if we know a field cannot be null, then there's no need to have something is null in the SQL. It's simply obviously false. Here's something else was improved. That's kind of I mean, this is not a dramatic change, but it's a small syntactic change, essentially the way you declare constraints and indexes. There was no predefined declaration for indexes. You essentially had to override the init method and use a kind of create or replace index, blah, blah, blah. Now we made it simply a more declarative approach when you can declare simply the index and put what you have to put as an expression for the index. The same for the constraints. You don't need this underscore SQL constraint lists with tuples and stuff like that. Instead, you declare the left-hand side is the name of the constraint that's going to be used into the SQL. And the right-hand side is the condition and the error message if the condition is not satisfied. And we even have a special case for the unique index because it's both an index and a constraint at the same time. So you see, just simply a more declarative approach for both. Just a few minor changes for field access. So we simply renamed the method and refactored it. So you have has field access and check field access. And it uses the field object, not the field name. So in the code, it's actually much more convenient to use this one. There's been some cleaning up of the configuration, the config parameters. Okay. So we've essentially simplified the stuff. And you can now use operating system environment variables to pass in some options. And essentially, they end up into odoo.tools.config. That makes it much easier to pass some fields for like launching the server by enabling a profiler to profile its performance, for instance. And this is just a small thing with this search, fetch, and fetch. I can show you if you want the effect of that. I'll show you this way. No, not this way. Yep. There. Whoops, sorry. So simple trick, that's the condition when you use search, and when you use search fetch, you can pass next to the domain a list of field names you'd like to fetch with the same SQL query, because this one just retrieves record IDs. But if you provide a list of field names, it will fetch those names. And if you provide no field names, then it automatically selects the fields that are actually that have the flag prefetch equal to true. This is kind of a cheap way to kind of combine two SQL queries together, and it's usually not critical, except in a few places where essentially you'd like to have a very, very fast query, like the ones managing the website pages. We've used that trick simply to get pages faster, and essentially having 2 SQL queries instead of 3, that makes a difference. Of course, if it's 50 instead of 51, you won't see a big difference. But when you have a small number there, that makes a difference. Okay? So getting back here, yeah. There, got it. So those are a few points. So we've kind of spotted there was a quadratic complexity issue in method mapped. We've refactored, in fact, the way the field cache was implemented. And instead of having an object implementing that cache with a complex API, and which ended up over the years to implementing field-specific stuff, we've completely removed that, and instead say we have a generic structure for the cache, and each field manages its own way to put the data in the field, in the cache. So essentially, each field has an entry in the cache and manages how the cache is organized its own way. So that was easier, for instance, for managing translated fields, which uses a trick, a special way of grouping the values of the different languages. It's now entirely delegated to the field. And the fact of kind of removing this object, which was kind of separate from the fields, made simply the field access slightly faster. And because it's a very common operation, of course, in your programs, this overall speeds up a little bit the ORM. We've played a little bit with the garbage collector because we've realized that the default thresholds to trigger the garbage collector to collect cycles in the data was not really suitable for what we typically do in Odoo. So we just simply changed the thresholds to avoid simply the garbage collector to kick in too frequently. And for instance, by default in Python, the garbage collector would immediately kick in once you've created 700 objects. But 700 objects is nothing. I mean, we easily make things where we just get 1,000 records out of the database. Once you iterate throughout those 1,000 records, you've already been through this 700 new objects. So simply just setting a better thresholds to avoid the garbage collector kicking in. And we've noticed, like when we're loading a registry, we just load a shitload of Python code, and the garbage collector is essentially useless during that phase. So while loading the registry, we just simply turn the garbage collector off and connect it on, turn it on again after that. That's kind of mini optimization, but actually makes a difference. Yeah, one thing we've done also, the QWeb template thing, it essentially impacts the website. And it's essentially the management, so we get the RER QWeb, the QWeb templates, they're compiled into an equivalent of Python. So we generate Python code corresponding to the template, and when we render the template, we simply call that function. Okay? So the template is compiled into Python, in fact. And the trick is, the way the website is organized is that you first retrieve the main template of the website, which is basic layout of the website. You compile it, you render it, and when you render it, you realize you need another template, which is the one you put just inside it, and yet another template inside it, and each template was compiled separately. So Christophe Mathieu did a trick to kind of when getting the first template, we analyze it and try immediately to retrieve the other templates it will need. And make sure that we get all those ones in memory, compile them all together, so then it's kind of it essentially enables to save SQL queries for getting all those templates and compiling them. And this makes essentially the first click faster on the website, for instance. So this is a kind of a first click optimization. We avoid spending too much time in there. Gonna jump to other stuff, quickly go through. We've simply reworked a bit the module structure of the module Odoo, which is the one you import simply in your code. And we made it a namespace package, and essentially we've removed quite a bunch of hacks and used kind of standard Python practice instead. And the good bit is that it enables tools that analyze your code or like make auto completion and stuff like that to work with the framework. Otherwise, it simply wouldn't work because it was confused about the way this package was organized or disorganized. So that was essentially the main thing. Oh, that's a funny bit. So that one, it's a funny one. It's something we've noticed when you're installing a large database with many modules, or when you're upgrading a database with many modules. A lot of the time was spent just setting up the models in the registry. So in the registry, you have the classes. Each class represents a given model, and the setup essentially consists in figuring it out, depending on all the model extensions, which are the fields that must be present on that model, to set up those fields so they know exactly what they should do, they know their compute functions and all stuff like that. And it manages also the inherited fields, determine the inherited fields, and so on. And actually, a large part of the time was spent during this setup, and here I'm going to go blub, there. So I'm going to show you. So this is a profile of the code for installing a database with many modules. So that's what we use on the run, but by the way, for then launching tests on those databases. So we're preparing stuff like that, and let me try to find out, yeah, this one. This one. So you could see immediately it clicked blue, and actually if I change the order in my profile, you can see that this block here on the left-hand side was where actually Odoo spent most of its time. And it's just setting up the models. And the reason is, every time you load a new module, that module may have modified the existing models by adding some fields and things like that, or adding a mix-in, things like that. And therefore, you have to redo the setup of the models. Well, we eventually fixed that issue by, wait, can I, getting back here. Now we are getting something like this. And the setup models is now there. And it takes much less time. So what we've done essentially is when you're loading a module, we determine which models have been actually impacted by adding models and model extensions. And we only set up those ones. We don't set up everything all the time. And so here, that's an intermediate phase. In fact, in the last phase, we got rid of that one. That block was gotten rid of. And so we went from something like up there. So we went from something like 7 minutes, almost 8 minutes in the total installation, and that part went down to less than 1 minute. So this is good for installing a large database empty first, but it's even better when upgrading databases. Okay. Here, so that one is a bit new. Essentially, I'm going to show it to you. It's going to be easier. So the basic problem is that when you assign groups to users, the groups themselves may imply each other. For instance, if you say you're going to be a sales manager, then the group automatically get also the group for sales users and other secondary groups that gives you access. The problem is when you're managing many users, if you want to remove such a group, you also have potentially to remove all the groups that were implied by this initial assignment. And it's pretty much like the same problem when you're installing a package on your operating system, and that package depends on other packages. It automatically installs those depending packages. And when you uninstall the first one, it will propose you to automatically uninstall the ones that were installed to satisfy the dependency, but which you may no longer need. We're doing essentially the same. And the result is when you assign a group to a user, it's just that. But we don't automatically add the user into the implied groups. What we do instead is that when we have to check the access rights of the users, we take its assigned groups, determine all the implied groups for those ones, and those ones determine what the user may or may not do. And it has the advantage essentially that what's stored in the database, it's kind of what you've decided to assign, and not indirect things. You only have somehow direct assignments. And that can be seen. We've also actually redone the widget managing the groups of a user. And that widget, by the way, enables to get rid of some code that I've introduced in Odoo, I think 13 years ago. And it was a bit messy. That was a hack, actually. And it took more than 10 years to get rid of that hack. We now have a kind of a clean code in that thing. Another thing we've kept on working on are the cron jobs. So the cron jobs in Odoo 18, we've already introduced a small API that enable a cron to somehow notify the scheduler of the cron how much work it's been done. So how many records it had processed, for instance. And it allowed to figure out when a cron fails, for some reason, whether it actually made some progress or not. And if it keeps on failing without ever making progress, it means there's something wrong with that cron. And we already had added a mechanism to automatically deactivate such a cron if it cannot provide evidence of progress. Because the cron may be actually using a lot of resources for nothing. Okay, we've actually improved the API of that thing, and we've been through all the crons in Odoo to make it use this API. And essentially, the trick is that avoid a cron that lasts for too long, that process too many records, because it makes a large database transactions. And big transactions are more likely to have serialization errors because of concurrent updates in the database. Therefore, they're more likely to fail just because, bad luck, someone changed the data. Or they're also more likely to be slow, just because the longer a transaction lasts, the more data it processes, it modifies. Somehow, the more memory Postgres has to keep for the data of that transaction, and the longer it becomes over time. That's something we've noticed. So essentially, we try to make essentially shorter database transactions with less data, and essentially, when you have lots of data, you make slices, and for each slice, you say, commit what I've just done. Do something, commit. Do something, commit. Except we've made an API to make that actually more convenient. If you want to know more about the crons, my colleague Thibaut made a presentation specific to that topic. And I invite you to go see him. And that's pretty much it for what I wanted to show you.
Does everybody hear me? Please nod your head. Can I just take it off? Yes. Well, thank you for being here, guys. Raphael, thank you for the presentation, and thank you as well for the amazing 11 years, because Raphael has been with us for about 11 years right now. He's even started...
14.
Sorry, 14 years. So please, can I have an amazing applause to Raphael, because he did an amazing job for the previous years.
And if you want to see more of me or hear more of me, I'm in the Odoo band. I play bass, and come see us to the concert tonight.
14 years, gentlemen. I think that after this amazing presentation, a lot of you still have some answers, some questions. We will give the answers, of course. You can scan this link, put your questions there, and we will ask them directly to Raphael.
Thank you, everyone. Just for those who are leaving, please kindly fold and wrap the cords of your headphones. We have a limited staff. Thank you.
There.
I will stand here to try my best and to read it. Could you make it a bit larger, please? Yes. Let us see. Yes, so a very good question. How would the new syntax work in XML domains?
The new syntax. The new domain object? Is that the question? So the new domain object is for pure Python. I don't think it would work in XML syntax.
Okay. Can filtered still be used with a lambda function?
Yes.
Amazing.
Actually, filtered, you can pass it a lambda function, a domain, and if it's a domain, actually, the domain is compiled into a function that is then used for the filtering.
Next question. Can you explain the any operator in a bit more depth, please?
So the purpose, I'm going to give you an example. Wait. I'm going to do it. Wait. Give me 1 second. It's going to be easier that way. Yeah. So the typical example I give for the any operator is, for instance, you're searching sales orders that buy that are for at least, let's say, 2 pair of shoes. So sales orders that contain a sales order line where the product is a shoe and the quantity is at least 2. You would think that you could write this something naively as something like this. So as you say, so those are the sales order for which there exists a line for a given product. So you give which product you may match, and I'd say something like this, doc, and it's something like this quantity or quantity. I don't remember the field name, never. So must be greater or equal to 2. You might think that this may do the job, but this will actually enable. This will be satisfied that by a sales order that sells, let's say, 1 shoe and 2, I don't know, 2 mice or something like that. Okay. So the way to do with that any, it's essentially, it's from a mathematical point of view, it corresponds to the exists quantificator. The way you write it is this way. So you say, there must exist a line that satisfies this condition. This one. And this part, essentially, you could think of that as, if you want to find those sales orders, one way to do it would be to search all the lines that satisfy the highlighted domain, and then take their corresponding sales order. That would be the ones you're looking for. But you have essentially, you can put any condition on the line which should match in your sales orders. That's the any condition. Of course, you've got the corresponding not any, and you say, okay, I want a sales order that doesn't sell shoe. You should say, but not any of the line should match the shoe product or one of the shoe products, for instance.
Thank you. This is a question that I personally don't understand, but it is amongst the favorites. It's the first one. The slides ask for permissions. Please fix.
Yeah, I'll fix that right after the presentation.
Perfect.
I thought I gave. Oh yeah, I know what I have to do. I'll fix that right after the presentation.
All right. A very good question as well that we have here. What is the upgrade path for custom code? How to move the legacy domain declaration to the new one?
It's not automatic. Essentially, you have to look at how the domain. So, wait, no, 2 things. First things first. The new object may get as an argument a domain as a list. It may get also a domain as the new object. Or it may get a condition and things like that. So the trick is that whenever you are in a method that receives the domain, and you may say, I can receive either the domain as a list or as the domain object. And if I just wrap into the domain class, I'm sure to have a domain. So I can actually enable methods to take the 2 forms of domain. So the domain object or the list. And that's how we've actually kind of smoothened the approach for most of our methods. So the method search accepts any of them. But internally, in fact, it uses the new object. It kind of um, makes it somehow make sure that you got the domain type. It converts automatically to the type, the expected type, the domain type, the new domain object, so that it can be optimized, analyzed, and plenty of the tricks like that. So that's the way to make callable methods accept both kinds of domains. Essentially, you just convert them to the new type. And by the way, if you iterate on a domain object, or if you convert it to a list, you've got the original, you've got the domain as a list with all the right fancy operator, prefix operators, and so on. So you can go back and forth between one format and the other.
The next question is a very technical question. Which version of Python is required for Odoo 19?
I think it's 3.12.
3.12, right?
I think it's 3.12, yes.
3.12. Next question, will the Odoo developer documentation be updated?
Yes. Yeah, it should be.
That's normally always the case.
It's always the case, yeah.
Let's see. Next question, I think this is a follow-up question to the, can you explain the any operator? This is a follow-up question. Can the same logic be applied with all operator in the future?
We currently don't have an all operator, but we could introduce an all operator. Essentially, when you say, so if you say, for instance, all the lines of a sales order have at least quantity 2, it means not any of them has a quantity less than 2. So there's an equivalence between an all and not any not. That's kind of a simple logic transformation. So we currently don't have the all operator, but actually thanks to the new domain, we might actually introduce it just as a kind of a syntactic sugar for the all and not all. Not
that
any
will probably something for the next version, of course.
Possibly, yes.
Possibly,
not
indeed.
for 19, indeed.
Next question that we have, is there plans to improve error tracebacks? Debugging Odoo can be very tricky. The code is built on abstraction layers. It's very hard to know exactly what's going on. It's one of the first questions.
One of the first questions? Yeah. That's a tricky question because there's not much we can do. Essentially, if you want clean tracebacks, no, let's face it the other way. There's no easy way to kind of manipulate the tracebacks of Python. The tracebacks are from Python, by the way, and we don't have much control over them. And it's actually, so if you want a better traceback, ideally you should change your code to avoid, for instance, intermediate calls that are just there for as an implementation trick or something like that, to just get rid of the stack frames, for instance. But then you end up into total spaghetti code or code without abstraction. If you introduce some abstractions, they inevitably end up into the call stack of your code, and there's not much we can do actually for the traceback, as far as I know. So, sorry.
Okay, thank you. One of the last questions. What strategy will be used for cleaning invalid foreign keys or missing references before data migration?
I honestly don't know.
That's a very honest answer.
Fine. I mean, some of our developers are specialized into the migration topic, so I suggest just go and find them and ask them.
Okay, and this is also a very good technical question, since most custom code is written in Odoo SH. Where is the question here? Yeah. Is there any plans to be able to manage virtual memory in Odoo SH?
I don't know. Again, that's so they are Odoo SH developers that might probably answer this.
Okay, probably another talk.
This is beyond my.
Then we will have our last question, since we need to round up in a few minutes. If the new object is not accessible in XML, then wouldn't it be also accessible in the QWeb?
I'm not sure it's accessible in the QWeb. I don't think it is right now. But if there's a real need for it, it's a small fix.
Okay.
In case.
Perfect. Rafael, thank you very much for the presentation. And once
welcome.
thank you to the audience for being a great audience.
Thank you very much.
Please wrap all of your phones up and just give them to our colleagues who are entry. Thank you.